Hi there, and welcome to Speaking Frankly. I'm Professor Franklin Joseph, and it's great to be able to have with us today Miss June Potts. June is a tour de force, I must say. June is the director of Menopause 360 and is a workplace menopause consultant. And I'm hoping today that all of you listening in will be able to glean some really, really amazing insights from June's fantastic story, her journey, and her career. Because although I sit here as a physician and my colleague Dami Aboyeji, who accompanies me on these podcasts, come from a very technical and medical background, that's not June's bag. And I'm hoping that we will see today not just what menopause as a condition does to women in their personal and social lives, but also there's so much of a wider impact when it comes to their professional and working lives. And that's what really intrigues me about June's insights, her experience. And June, I'm so pleased to have you with us today.
Oh, it's a privilege to be here.
Fantastic. So I thought the best way for us to start off today, June, was for you to just tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in call centres. I headed up call centres for just around about 28 years. And when throughout that period of time, I'd suffered with hormonal issues such as endometriosis. But because I tended to work in male-dominated industries such as financial services, I tended to suppress my symptoms, so to speak, to be able to continue to do the job that I did. I was a senior leader, and it wasn't until I was age 32 that I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And endometriosis is something that happens when, through periods and menstruation, and it's very painful, and it can sort of take you out of your life for about 1 to 2 days a month. And throughout my younger years, because I had endometriosis, I didn't think that I would be able to have children. However, I did have the most horrendous pregnancy, all down to the fact that I had hormonal imbalance of hormones. And basically, throughout my pregnancy, I suffered with what they call hypersaliva. So I had constant saliva dripping out my mouth for about 7 months. I also experienced hypertrumpet, which is an excessive growth of breast tissue, which meant that after I'd had my daughter, when she was 5, I was required to have a breast reduction, because I'd sort of gone from a 32C to a 32HH, and I was ill throughout my pregnancy. So that's just some of the examples of the thing. Yeah, I never divulged this within the workplace because for some reason, especially in my generation, we never talked about what was deemed then as women's things, and sometimes to some extent is still classed as that today. So what happened was when I was 50, after I fainted through endometriosis pain, in the Chester shopping centre, and I was rushed to hospital, I decided to have a hysterectomy. And I thought that the hysterectomy would be the answer to all my challenges. However, having been given an A4-page piece of paper about the menopause, and I don't think that it would have even mattered. I had the hysterectomy, but I hadn't realised the extent to how the menopause would affect me. So I had a hysterectomy age 50, and within 4 weeks I was experiencing all the classic symptoms, the main top symptoms, which was hot flushes, night sweats, brain fog, mood swings, depression, low mood. I was given patches, patches for HRT patches. However, what they didn't agree with me, but nobody told me that there was 70 different preps, and there was gels, and there was sprays, and there was oral medication. So I just stopped taking them. And I went through a 6-year natural menopause, and through that time, I lost myself. I totally lost sight of myself. I lost who I was. My family didn't recognise me. My friends didn't recognise me. And I went from being quite an outgoing person to being very inclusive, to sitting in my office and work, whereas I had a large call centre to manage outside. I went to sitting in my office, and I didn't want to speak to people. I lost confidence. I just didn't understand what was going on with me, and to the point that I had a new line manager. And at the same time as going through the menopause, I was going through what they call, I was typical sandwich generation. My mother had just been diagnosed with dementia. My daughter was going to university, and my husband was recovering from cancer. So as a result, my stress levels were quite significant, which compounds menopause. And I cried twice at work and was told by my new line manager that he didn't think that I was able to cope with the demands of my job anymore, and that I should suppress my feelings, try to suppress my feelings till I got home, because it was unprofessional to cry in the workplace. So if you think about suppressing your feelings until you get home, it brings on extra stress, my cortisol levels. And what happens is when you're going through menopause, cortisol levels increase. And so therefore, women find themselves often in a fight and flight situation, and that's what brings on panic attacks, anxiety. And so that was what was happening with me, but I didn't realise it at the time. So as a result of my line manager thinking I couldn't cope, I was sidelined in work. And because I defined myself through my work, I was successful. The month before, I just won the European Call Centre Awards with my team. And when you define yourself through your job and something like that happens to you, it's quite significant in life, to the point that I did have a cliff edge moment. I had, research says that 1 in 10 women have suicidal thoughts when going through the menopause, and unfortunately, I was one of those women. And it happened when I was on holiday on a beach in Thailand on some rocks, and when I come to my senses, I thought I've got to do something to get out of this this sort of pit I found myself in. And so in the 20 minutes it took me to walk back along the beach, I'd planned out what I was going to do. My plan was to return to education, to do an MBA, which is something I'd always wanted to do, and to return and to understand what had happened to me within the workplace. Why is menopause so negative within the workplace, and why is it misunderstood, and why do people not sort of disclose? And that was one of the things I decided to do, because whenever I meet a crossroads in my life, I do return to education. So within 2 days of it, so by the time I got to the end of the beach, I shared that news with my daughter and my husband, asked if I could get their support. And within 2 days of returning back to the UK, I applied for the MBA programme at Liverpool John Moores University. I was accepted, and I completed my MBA last year with distinction, and my dissertation, which explored the barriers that prevent female leaders from disclosing their menopause in the workplace, received an award through Liverpool Business School. And the reason being is because for the first time in the history of the MBA programme, menopause had been considered a business issue. So therefore my research was considered niche and innovative. However, if you fast forward now to today, there are lots of people talking about menopause, whereas, there wasn't many people last January talking about it.
Absolutely. June, can I just say, I think this is a great time to just say how amazing your journey has been, and, how impressive it is to see how you've overcome that adversity, the challenge that you faced. And I think I'd love to just congratulate you, I think, is the important thing to do in that scenario, because not a lot of people are able to pick themselves up from that physical, hormonal withdrawal that happens in menopause, to be overcome it and then to keep pushing forward. And then to take that experience and then channel it into studying about it and its impact, and then doing what you're doing now, which is, helping more women in the workplace. Because one of the reflections I have is that, at around the time that, a woman is going through the menopause is probably the time at which you've worked your way through the ranks almost to getting to senior leadership, and you're in your professional prime in a way.
Absolutely.
And then this comes and hits you, and it throws a right spanner in the works. And to overcome that and to keep going is such an important thing, to not to lose the talent that we have, in the female workforce. And I think that's really, really incredible.
And I think what you say is absolutely right. And, there was a report that was published, a study that was published by the government in 2015 that highlighted the economic participation of women in the workplace, and highlighting that there were more women over 50, a third of women over 50 are in working. And so therefore, workplaces do need to consider the effects of menopause. And, without that education, how are women supposed to know what the menopause is? Because my mother never told me about menopause. And when I talk to organisations and women's own room, I ask people to put their hands up and to say how many people were told about menopause by their mothers. And there's hardly any hands that go up, because there was this silence, veil of silence across society and in the workplace. And it's only through popular culture and celebrities talking about menopause in recent, over the last 2 years, that menopause has come to the fore. But you're absolutely right. There are women who are in their prime who, as they reach menopause, they're being knocked or sent sideways, either sidelined, or they're leaving the workplace unable to cope with the symptoms. And this happens in the medical profession. There was a report in 2020 that highlighted discrimination within the medical profession against women going through menopause, and women were afraid to ask for the support that they needed. And so it's across all occupations that this is happening, not only in male-dominated organisations like financial services.
Absolutely. And I think, just to backtrack a little bit, so I guess, I look at my own personal kind of experience as an endocrinologist and as a physician. I see a lot of women who come to see me looking for advice on medical interventions for the menopause.
Yes.
And Dami, being from a technical background, Dami, we've seen tests and biochemistry and ability to test for hormonal levels, not just in the traditional way of going to a doctor, etc. Yeah. Talk us a little bit through that kind of stuff that's happening in the testing world, if you want to.
Yeah, first of all, I'm quite overwhelmed by your story.
Thank you.
It's quite touching. I haven't had anyone sit down and actually talk about menopause. Fine, I understand a little bit of the biochemistry, because we have lateral flow tests that, any woman can easily purchase, and, a finger prick test.
Yes.
And, you get a drop of blood and you mix it with a buffer and you run it through this capillary-driven device and you get a result, right? And so we actually have that. And then there's other kind of laboratory-based tests that will look at more hormones. We look at talking about your luteinizing hormone, for example, right? And they can use these levels to kind of judge if you're going through menopause. I think those are kind of like indicators that kind of serve as a test, which is quite good to see. And I think a lot of people are becoming more aware that these tests are available as well. So yeah, based on the data we have, those are actually two of our best-selling products.
All right.
So I think people are cordoning on to the fact, and you're absolutely right. I think as celebrity and popular culture has brought menopause to the fore, what we've managed to do is also get the attention of government.
Absolutely.
And government has taken it on board. I mean, it's such a challenging time for women at the moment, especially with short supply of certain forms of HRT, trying to get the brands and the products that people really need or want to try and, get the most appropriate. It's like you said, there's a whole array of preparations of HRT.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing for me is when people come to me, a lot of what I end up doing is talking women through their personal kind of private issues around the symptoms, which are hot flushes, sweats. The brain fog is a really important one. And there's also the whole interpersonal thing between relationships, loss of libido, lack of drive and vigor, and interacting with. They often have children who are in their teens and trying to transition, and it's almost like all of it comes at the same time.
Yes.
And they're just overwhelmed by the menopausal transition. I mean, it's great to have options like HRT to give people.
Yeah.
But I think as a physician, as a doctor, my purview has always been limited to doing that. I mean, I try and support people by signposting them to my team with some psychological support, because sometimes that's what's needed. You also try and address general health issues because you're at a stage in your life, well, not only is it menopause, but you're also worried about high blood pressure, you're worried about diabetes, you're worried about everything else that's going on with you.
Osteoporosis is very common, isn't it, amongst women?
So once you transition from that, though, and talk about the various options, the bit that you don't always spend time as a doctor talking about, which is why your story and what you do is so important, is what happens outside of that personal sphere.
Yeah.
And I thought that, some of your work around how it impacts the workplace, around pensions and around, those kind of issues, I thought was really fascinating. So I don't know if you want to tell us and our listeners a little bit about that kind of commercial impact as well.
Well, the financial impact of menopause, there are areas that specifically impact women themselves, but also organisations. So if we look at organisations first, the impact is seen within absenteeism and presenteeism, and also women leaving the workplace. So it costs on average about £35,000 to replace an experienced person within the workplace by the time you go through onboarding, training and what have you. Also as well, the absenteeism, research says that 40 million sick days are taken annually with regards to menopause symptoms, and that is at a cost of 1.3 billion, and that is a cost to industry. So therefore, whatever organisations can do to support individuals within their organisation, and I say about individuals because menopause isn't gender specific, it can affect transgender and intersexual communities, intersex communities, and also lesbian, gay communities. So therefore, it's important to recognise that as well. But what I would say is that individuals will take time off work because of the symptoms that they're going through, but they won't necessarily divulge it as menopause. So therefore, the true cost of menopause is unknown, because that is just by looking at the symptoms that have been presented and saying, okay, that could be deemed as menopause, so therefore that would contribute to absenteeism. Also as well, you've got women who are presenting at work who are sick, in effect, that they're unwell and not able to do their jobs to their full potential, but they turn up to work, and that is termed presenteeism. And so therefore there is a cost to that because women are not being as effective. And a study by Health and Hair Clinics, they've been mentioned by UK Parliament, have identified that one of the first signs of presenteeism and women potentially entering into the menopause transition is that women will tend to work later. So they'll tend to work a couple of hours because it could take longer to do a task what they're used to doing because of brain fog, because of the fact that they're fatigued. It could take them longer to do, where they could previously do a task in 10 minutes, it could take them an hour. So therefore, in order not to be found out, so to speak, they could be working longer hours, and that is something for line managers to be looking for. So that's from the organisational perspective. And another thing also I would point out here is that a lot of the reasonable adjustment that government talks about and that is spoken about as basically a symptom or a solution for menopause is about offering reasonable adjustment. Now, to offer every woman in the workplace reasonable adjustment and flexible working isn't possible, it's not sustainable. So what I also advise organisations on is how to support the individuals who work for them, their employees, as to how to support themselves through the menopause. So give them the education, the awareness, the tools to be able to manage menopause themselves. And one of the things that I would refer to is menstruation. If we didn't educate young people about menstruation, what would people think at that time of life when that happens? So therefore, menopause is exactly the same. If you educate, you raise awareness, then individuals can see the signs, they can understand the symptoms, and they can do something about it. And women don't necessarily want to be treated differently in work. They really don't. But however, menopause is, it's the reaction to menopause is that some women will consider working part-time. And as you mentioned and you referred to, it can affect pensions, it can affect NI contributions. So therefore, if somebody leaves the workplace and they haven't paid a full NI contribution, then when it comes to receiving their state pension, they will not receive the full state pension. And this tends to get forgotten about the finances of females and women. Also as well, because menopause contributes to the divorce rates. So for instance, divorce rates amongst women, the average age for menopause is 45 to 55. The divorce rate in that category is the highest. And so therefore it could be said that menopause contributes to divorce. And I actually go into workplaces and I have males who say to me, you know, I didn't know anything about the menopause, and I believe that the menopause is the cause of why I'm now divorced. And that is really sad when you think about it, isn't it? You know, that it can affect the dynamics of relationships. And so therefore, if you've got the divorce rate is high, then that means that there's going to be women going back into the workplace who may not have worked previously, and so therefore still will not have paid their full NI contributions, or if they've taken time out to have children, again, that will impact their contributions. Also as well, if women opt to go part-time, depending on the organisation, then contributions to pensions will be much reduced. So their pensions, when they decide to leave work, or if they leave work early, will also be affected. And so the financial impact of menopause is far greater than we realise, both for organisations and for actual women themselves, individuals themselves.
It's fascinating, you know, when you think about it like that. And it never occurred to me until I met you to think about that side of things, because you tend to have this single kind of, how should I say, single dimensional view of what you should do as a physician sometimes. And I think the second bit that you kind of built on there was around, you know, men in the workplace recognizing divorce rates. But I think it was a story that you told at one point around some of the work you do in youth communities, informing,
yes.
you know, young people about the menopause. So tell us that story, because I found that really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I work with the NHS youth community, and that's social groups between 12 to 17 years of age. And I delivered a session so that they could understand what menopause was. And basically, I positioned it that menopause is puberty in reverse. So whilst, you know, younger people are going through puberty and their hormones are all over the place, it's the same for their mums, and people in their lives who are going through menopause, but their hormones are in decline. And so it's the opposite side of reproduction. And whilst, you know, it's great news that menopause is now being taught in school as part of sexual education. Part of that, you know, you have, you know, puberty, and then you have maternity and, you know, reproduction, and then the end of that is menopause, which has never been spoken about. That is now being talked about. So that means that younger generations are now being educated about the menopause, which is just great. However, we've now got generations who are uneducated, and that includes youth. So whilst menopause affects 51% of the population, it indirectly affects 49% of the population. And let me explain why. And that's because it does affect men. We've talked about the divorce rates. You know, we've talked about the fact that, you know, mothers don't even talk to their daughters about the menopause. So men, they're unlikely to talk to their sons about it. So where are men supposed to be educated about the menopause? If it's not by their mothers, they're not going to be educated by their friends down at the pub, yeah, or whatever, and they're not going to, you know, they're not going to talk to other women about it. So therefore, where the workplace is the most logical place where they will. However, organisations are having challenges getting men into the workplace. So why I've positioned men in there is because when I was talking, you know, I've gone a bit off track, but with the Youth Forum, it's a group of 12 to 17-year-olds. And so when I was speaking to them, it tends to be males who make comments at the end of the session. You very rarely get young females talking about the menopause on those. And you get young men who say, I'm really sad to hear about the menopause. I knew nothing about it. And if I had, the relationship with my mother may be a lot better than what it is today. And one 15-year-old spoke to me and he said, if I'd have known about the menopause, my relationship would have been different with my mother because I wouldn't have gone nose to nose with her when I thought that she was losing it and she had mental health problems, and I wouldn't have told her that I thought that she was mental and she'd lost it, you know. And he said, what I'm going to do when I get off this call is I'm going to go and give her a hug. He said, and I'm going to understand more about what it's like to live as mum as opposed to what it's like to live as me. And it is quite a powerful story that you can bring young people into that conversation by relating to people who mean most to them, such as their mothers. So what I sort of got from that, I created a product called Generation M. And basically, I sell it into organisations that they do awareness training with their employees. But because a lot of people are working from home now, it would be good to bring their family into the training. So to bring their wives, come and get them, to, you know, the wives to sit along, husbands, partners, whatever, for young people, so young women, young men, to bring their mother to training and to get involved in work, because home and work now, you know, it's becoming one in some instances. And so to be educated together as a group, it then covers the social aspects of training, menopause within the training, but it also covers the workplace challenges of menopause, so everyone gets a 360 view of what the impact of menopause is at home and at work, and so people can support, and it'll also provide that psychological space where to get that conversation going about menopause.
And I think that's fascinating. I think that education piece, that information piece, and being able to openly speak about it. And I think it's touching the other family members. We don't, you know, it's not just the individual woman's journey to have. I think, you know, it does impact on other people within the workplace, within the family. And I love that story about, you know, the relationship between the youth and his mum.
Yeah.
Because it's reflective of so many relationships, I think, around, you know, around the world, where teenagers are going at the time when are developing into teenagers at a time when their mothers are going through the menopause.
Yeah.
And I think it really resonates and chimes.
Yeah.
I think the other bit that's interesting for me is, you know, through your work, obviously, you must come across people from different cultures and diverse
Yes.
backgrounds. And I think,
Yes.
we recognize from a physical, medical point of view that there are differences.
Absolutely.
And what are your experiences on that?
Yeah, my experience, having spoken to women of colour, is that their experience of menopause can be quite significant in that it's more problematic, more challenging. So they may experience more symptoms and for longer. So the age that women will enter into menopause, the average age is 51. However, for women of colour, it can be as early as 45. And when you look at the demographics of menopause, you have 1 in 1,000 women will experience menopause before the age of 30. And so, this comes away from that idea that menopause is something that happens in older life, in older age. And that in itself can create problems with relationships, and also as well with confidence and the future life, because reproduction as well can be affected if someone goes into early menopause. Also as well, 1 in 100 women below 40, as mentioned earlier, will experience menopause. So therefore, it's about understanding how culture can affect the age at which menopause occurs. And so what you have is in different cultures and different, so in the UAE, menopause starts at 47. In India, it's 45. In Malaysia, it's 50. And that's all to do with the socio issues relating and challenges relating to menopause. And so, the lived experience of menopause in the environment in which you live can affect the age and have challenges for future health. And I think, so socioeconomic grouping comes into that. Yeah, education is another thing that can affect menopause as well, the way it can in the health, the general health of an individual.
Yeah, and I think the other bit that, we really need to kind of address is the fact that we can do all the education that we can and do all the awareness raising that we can, but we've got to also start thinking about what are the various interventions that we can put into place.
Yes.
I think there's the education intervention, there's no doubt. There's the testing interventions, which we've talked about, so that people can get some awareness of what their body's going through. People like a test. I mean, it's just human nature. But often with the menopause and the perimenopause, the tests aren't always helpful, because actually you really got to go by the story, you got to go by the symptoms, you got to go by how women are feeling. And again, I sit there and reflect as a traditional consultant medical practitioner on what I offer people. And, there's obviously HRT in the form of estrogen, progesterone, and all the different preparations, oral, transdermal patches, gels, and, tablets. Then there's the whole debate around bioidentical hormones and body-identical hormones.
Yes.
And, you kind of get to the point where, people are more aware now and therefore want to try different things and see if they can get themselves to the best person that they can be on the right preparation that can get them there. So once you get past the estrogen progesterone conversation, then a lot of people, a lot of women come seeking help with transdermal testosterone as well, because it's been shown to have benefits. And, in specifically, a lot of women come to me with HSDD, which is hypoactive sexual desire disorder. Yeah. And so it's recognizing that, whereas I don't think a lot of women, A, open up about it, and B, practitioners don't want to know about it, because it's just an uncomfortable conversation, and we've got to get both practitioners and women feeling comfortable opening up and talking about that kind of thing, because otherwise it's like you were asked to suppress your feelings in the workplace. All you do is you bottle it up at home.
Yes.
And it doesn't get you anywhere, and it just overwhelms you, and it just adds more and more to detriment to your health, both mental and physical.
Yeah.
But I'm also a keen believer that, yes, there's the tradition, and that I will help people with whatever traditional pharmacological prescribing I can do, and it works for the majority of them. But people nowadays are more aware that there are other ways to look at this. There are other ways to try and transition using herbal, natural supplements. For some people, HRT just doesn't work. They don't tolerate it. They don't like the way it makes them feel. They just don't want it. Some of them are worried about the risks.
Yeah,
breast cancer risks,
yeah.
etc. Which I think, I don't know what your opinion is about the Women's Health Initiative and where we are with that. I mean, HRT got a lot of bad press.
It did.
I'm a firm believer that was bad press and it isn't the reality of the situation. As long as people are given the right information in the right way and counseled appropriately, I think HRT has huge benefits.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I would agree. It was the silver bullet for me. And I had resisted. I tried the patches, but, they didn't work. And as I said earlier, I didn't know that there was other, preps that I could consider. However, I wasn't too, if it had really been concerned about wanting to take HRT, I would have done something about it, but I thought, just not for me, so I wouldn't push it. And also there's one of the things for me, it was about putting weight on. I didn't want to put weight on, and HRT, and I don't know whether that's the case, my GP says not, is that you put weight on. HRT makes you put weight on. And so I didn't want to do that, so I thought, well, actually, I won't put weight on now. If it doesn't agree with me, I'll find other alternatives. And so the World Health Initiative, the figures were skewed and it's come to light now. And that did damage, whereby 1 million women stopped taking HRT overnight when that report was released. However, I think that now education is starting to come to the fore, that more women, I think that's part of what the shortages are, the HR shortages are starting to consider HRT. However, I belong to the NHS England Menopause Steering Committee, and in a meeting that we had in May, it was talked about that there was only 14% of women currently taking HRT. The British Menopause Society state that they're 18%. So therefore, I assume the difference is because people are going private to obtain the HRT. But they were speculating that by the end of this year, that will have increased to about 30% because of the information that has come to the fore through the Davina McCall documentaries. And the second, did you see those documentaries yourself? Yeah.
Channel 4?
Yeah, Channel 4. The second documentary, actually, I think for me, the line of the programme was, women have 3 hormones to are replaced. Whose bright idea was that? And that really resonated because you talked about testosterone. Testosterone isn't prescribed naturally under the NHS to females, and as a result, people are required to go private and pay private fees to be able to get imported testosterone. Majority of it comes in from Australia, I'm told. So that is an important factor that, testosterone isn't readily available. But as you referred to, there are women who don't wish to take HRT. For me, it was a silver bullet. I didn't find it until 2 years ago when I became educated, and it helped with my brain fog, it helped with my confidence, and it helped with my mood as well. So that's great. But other than taking HRT, there are different lifestyle changes that you can do. So one of the main things is to have a sleep routine, and a lot of people download sleep apps to be able to help with that. Another thing as well that women can do in order to see if there are any patterns in symptoms is to journalise, and journalising can be very therapeutic, but what it also allows you to do is see patterns in behaviours, so that when women present at their GP for support, if that's a route that they choose to go down, then they can go informed with all the information that they need, so that the GP can help them. It's all about informing women as well to book double appointments, because you've got 3 hormones. You've got 3 hormones to talk about. 10 minutes isn't enough. You need those 20 minutes. So it's about you know, advising women to ask for that. And a lot of women also have white coat syndrome as well. I don't know whether you've ever experienced
I don't wear a white
that.
coat for that reason, you know.
Yeah. And so therefore, you know, they don't question, they don't ask the right questions, and they just go with what their GP, even though it doesn't work for them. So these are things to consider, but lifestyle is particularly important, and I advocate it's not about managing menopause for the here and now, it's about managing it for the future. So for when women reach their 60s, 70s, 80s, you mentioned osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, and they are common denominators as a result of menopause not being managed properly, and they're associated to menopause. And so it's about managing menopause now to be able to live well in the future and age well. And so, you know, that can be done by exercise. So it's not all about yoga, and it's not all about meditation. It's about strength bearing exercises to be able to support bone and muscle strength, you know, health. And also as well, it's about having the right nutrients and the right diet to be able to support the body and remaining hydrated. You know, these are just typical things that we are doing naturally. However, during the menopause, a little bit more attention needs to be paid to, you know, maybe a lack of magnesium, looking at foods that are rich in magnesium, also soy, sesame, because research does prove that women in Asian communities experience lesser symptoms and have a shorter menopause because their mindset is positive towards menopause, whereas in Western society, the media, women, you know, everything is sort of geared towards negative rhetoric, whereas in the Asian community, in Asian society, they consider menopause to be that time of life where women are respected, where, you know, they've reached the end of their childbearing years, so therefore they are, you know, they're to be sort of have a new life, a new lease of life, and that's the way it's posited. So therefore, it's very positive, and mindsets are positive, and I think that has a huge effect on health when your mindset is positive and you can do something that can support yourself, and that is part of the toolkit for menopause. It's about being able to identify that menopause doesn't need to be negative. It can be positive, providing you know what to do and what kind of way you want to manage your menopause, whether it be holistically through a natural menopause, through diet, exercise, through mindset, meditation, those kind of things, through sleep routines. Also, as well, through looking at reducing alcohol intake, looking at caffeine intake, looking at smoking, you know, reducing smoking or stopping smoking altogether, because they can all have a huge effect on menopause. So by putting all of those things in place can help women and support women to live a better and healthier life. However, it won't always work, as you mentioned, and HRT is sometimes necessary, especially for brain fog and also for hot flushes as well.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. I think, you know, taking that holistic view is always the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know women who come to me and say, you know, it didn't really work out, but I managed to get some evening primrose, or I got some black cohosh, and it really did the trick for me. And, you know, at the end of the day, you do get a lot of medical practitioners who are very kind of, you know, it's by the book, there's no evidence for that, but actually you can't take away someone's personal reflection on how they feel.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, if it works for you, well, it works for you. You know, who am I to say it's not going to work for you? And I think it's important to recognize that.
Yeah.
So June, in terms of, you know, our interventions, like we talked about the medical interventions and we talked about non-medical interventions, we've also discussed how women need to speak to a medical professional, open up to them, but also to talk to family members. But the thing that women want to also do and find helpful, I think, is talking to each other when they're going through the menopause. And there's the concept of menopause cafes, which I don't think you particularly agree with, but you like the concept of menopause lounges, don't you? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Firstly, I think that the menopause cafes serve a real purpose, and it's great. But what I don't like about that concept is it's just women talking about their experiences and providing information to other women that could be incorrect. So there's nobody there to regulate those type of meetings. Whereas lounges allows women to share their lived experiences, but also as well, it provides that specialism from keynote speakers, so people who maybe are focused on menopause mindset or menopause and CBT, which has been proven to be a solution for menopause. Now, it won't be for everybody because menopause is different, so therefore the solutions are different. So therefore, the lounges allow women to be able to understand, allows me to bring in people who can talk about skincare, for instance, because some of the symptoms of menopause are itchy, crawling, dry skin. Also, and that's due to the fact that, estrogen levels are in decline. Estrogen is known as the lubricant hormone, so therefore, it affects dry eyes and, dry mouth, all those kind of things. And then also as well, I have people who come in who talk about weight management and menopause and about exercise, what kind of exercise to do, what strength exercises specific to symptoms. I also as well have individuals who talk about gut health. So how is the gut connected? And, it may interest people to realise that during menopause, one of the first signs, and that isn't strictly connected to perimenopause, is the fact that women may experience food intolerances, such as gluten or dairy intolerances. Also, as well, they may start to they may have hay fever because histamine levels are also affected. So therefore they can start with hay fever, which they've never experienced throughout their life. And that could be a telltale sign that they've entered into perimenopause. However, these are some of the lesser known symptoms that we don't often talk about. We often talk about the brain fog and the hot flushes and, vaginal dryness is another one. And recently they've started to sell localized estrogen over the counter because a lot of women won't go to their GP. You talked about women not wanting to talk about sex with their, menopause and sexual relationships with their GP. Well, they also don't want to talk about vaginal atrophy or dryness. However, it affects 62% of women. And so therefore those women are suffering in silence. So when you get women together, all it needs is one brave soul to mention it, to mention sexual relationships or to mention vaginal atrophy, and the whole room's talking about it. And I think one of the saddest things I've heard in a lounge is, are you aware that menopause and shoplifting are connected? Yeah?
It's a new one on me.
It's a new one. So what happened was in one of those lounges, a lady shared that her mother had been prosecuted for shoplifting while I was going through the menopause, and her father was a solicitor. They lived in a village, and the mother didn't go out after she was prosecuted for shoplifting. She absentmindedly put something in her bag, and in the major city, and it wasn't taken into account. And my father made it go away, but the embarrassment and the shame that she went through. And following that, I did some research, and it's a thing. Menopause and shoplifting is connected, and it's considered midlife. Is something midlife shoplifters, and so that's something that another aspect of life that menopause can affect.
So June, I think that insight of how varied the impact of the menopause can be hopefully drives home the message to our viewers and listeners that actually if you're a woman going through the menopause, don't bottle it.
Absolutely.
Don't hold it in. Go and find someone in your family, someone medical, or someone in a menopause lounge, or a colleague, or someone else going through that same experience, with appropriate moderation of conversation, obviously, to be able to share that experience and to not let it overwhelm you, but to find solutions so that you can do what June has done with her life. Because I will go back to the story at the beginning. Again, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but June's been nominated for 2 awards for her work as Best Startup, and also for another award, which I can't remember now.
Made a Difference.
For Made a Difference by the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing that someone who has been through your experience harnessed that experience and the learning from it, reinvested it back in yourself and into what you do to be able to give women in the workplace and women in general the opportunity to follow a similar path of not letting it get on top of them, but making it work for them and living their life to the full. And on that note, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you for your time
it's been
today.
A privilege.
And for your insight, and I am in awe of what you have achieved. So thank you again very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks,
and
June.
It's a real privilege to have been invited to speak to you today.
Sometimes the best way to capture people's lived experience and emotions and impacts from a condition like the menopause is to hear it in their own words. And what June did as part of her research was actually interview people to glean those insights of how the menopause affected them. And June has done an amazing piece of work and converted it into an I-poem that reflects some of her own emotions and her own experiences. And I think it is an absolutely moving piece. And I'm going to let June deliver that for us. And over to you, June.
Okay, thanks for letting me share my story. This is my I-poem, my menopause story in poetry. I worked in financial services. I held a senior position for 16 years. I had endometriosis and PMDD. I didn't divulge. I had a hysterectomy. I entered menopause. I lacked menopause awareness. I looked after a mother with dementia. I had a daughter leaving for university. I had a husband recovering from cancer. I was fatigued. I had insomnia. I had mood swings. I was stressed. I overtalked. I'd forget if I didn't. I had brain fog. I felt I was losing my mind. I was paranoid. The company was transitioning. I was emotional. I cried at work twice. I had low mood. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't divulge. I identified myself through my work. I had a new male manager. I performed. It was behaviors. I cried twice. I was emotional. I was deemed stressed, unable to cope. I was sidelined without discussion or support. I had no choice but to take a newly created role. I emptied my office alone. I felt humiliated and embarrassed. I divulged. I received 6 counselling sessions without follow-up. I became invisible. I suffered short-term mental ill health. I had a cliff edge moment. I requested flexible working. I started a part-time MBA. I needed to understand. I needed to get my life back. I needed to research the stigma associated with menopause at work. I was denied research opportunities at work. I was told no one wants to talk menopause, and that was 2020. I found another source. I engaged with female leaders from other sectors. I realised I wasn't alone. I found the courage to speak at work. I was made redundant. I became educated. I found my silver bullet was HRT. I finished my MBA with distinction. I won an award from Liverpool Business School. I turned a negative experience into a positive. I set up Menopause 360 consultancy. I now help organisations to understand the impact of menopause. I have since been identified as making a difference by the Chamber of Commerce. I was privileged to be awarded the Liverpool John Moores University Vice-Chancellor's PhD scholarship. I am now the person I could have been and living proof that if educated, the menopause can be positive, achievable through education, awareness, HRT, self-care, changing habits, and simply talking. Thank you.